Thank you, Tim. Well, it's good to be here, and it's good to know that you're serious about what you do, or you wouldn't be here. And I just think that it's healthy once in a while that we in this business of choral music just sort of sit back, as you're doing, and re-examine what goes into this business of choral music. And some have heard me talk about this before, but I've sort of in the last few months, years, I guess it's almost now, have come to, and trying to grab a hold of what this choral art's all about, is to sort of come up with what I call 3 pillars of the choral art. And it concerns building and development. And one is development of the instrument, or building of the instrument. Secondly, building the repertoire. And third, building the musical leadership. Let me just back up a bit. Building the instrument, of course, I mean the choir. Everything that goes into making that choir you work with a well-tuned instrument. So you're talking about auditions, all the tasks that go into making that a fine-tuned instrument. Secondly, building the repertoire and programming, of course, that comes out of it. Everything that goes into digging, that's another word for research. You may want to call it researching music. I call it digging. And programming that comes from that, of course. And third, building the musical leadership. You, the conductor. Everything that goes into the not only musicianship, but also the leadership of any given choir. But just as the sake of, just as part of the exercise, if I pressed you against the wall and said, which of these is most significant? Not most important, because they're all important. But if I pressed you and said, which is most significant, how many would say it's building the instrument? How many would say it's building the repertoire? How many would say it's building the musical leadership, the conductor? Well, some of your chicken didn't vote. You got to be bold. I've thought a lot about it, and of course it's a loaded question, and it's number 2, building the repertoire and programming. Everything that the choir becomes or does not become, and you think about it, is through the repertoire. If it does comic book music, well, nothing wrong with comic books. It's a comic book choir. If it does Shakespeare, it's something else. Same thing with the conductor. What he or she becomes or doesn't become as a conductor is through the repertoire. And I can say this from experience. If I've grown at all, it's been through the repertoire primarily. Can you hear me back here? So, these 3 pillars. And today, we're going to touch a little bit on building that instrument. And when you think about building the instrument, there are 2 primary tasks. One is gathering that raw material, and secondly, developing that raw material. And when you think of and I'm talking, first of all, about auditions, if we have the chance to audition. Some of us don't. But knowing what goes into what you would hope could be an audition choir will also help you when you're dealing with totally volunteer choirs. What are those fundamental things? And they've sort of gelled in 3 major areas for me, and I'm sure probably they fit what you also have thought about. First of all, musicianship. Secondly, voice quality. Third, personality. When I say musicianship, I mean both innate and acquired skills. Voice quality is more than just a sound, but singing ability. I mean, actual, can they sing? And third, personality. And here I wonder, can I live with that person for a year or a season? And that's no small issue. But for the sake of the discussion again, I'm going to press you against the wall and say, which of these 3 is most significant when you're choosing a singer, if you have the option of auditioning? Here you get to vote again, but be bold. Is it the musicianship, both innate and acquired skills? Is it the voice quality and singing ability? Raise your hand. Or is it the personality? Can you live with that person? Well, of course, they're all important again. But if I were going to and this comes again from more years than most of you have probably been doing what I've been doing. It's the musicianship, both innate, especially innate, and acquired skills. And I think here's where a lot of conductors, personally, I think they miss the boat when they focus so much in the audition process on just the qualities of voice, that sound, and don't think about the musical skills, especially if you're in a high school or college where potential should be our main concern, how we develop those students. Task number 2, and this, I'm talking about developing that raw material, and we've singled out tone today. It's a pretty well-known fact that, and it's a pretty well accepted fact, I guess you'd say, that the first thing that an audience reacts to in a choral performance, with probably the exception of visual aspects, is tone. Certainly, it's a pretty universal thing, I think, but there is, I should say, quite a variety among conductors as to their attitudes and their concern about tone being priority. And to some choirs, some conductors, tone is everything. To others, it's quite secondary. The good thing that what I have read and observed is that if it is secondary, repertoire is first, and I think that's a good primary goal. But assuming that beautiful tone is a goal, how does one make it happen? What do we have to do to get a reaction to say that this is beautiful, or it's moving, or this tone is really inspiring? I'm going to give you a very simplistic formula first. Maybe some of you have, like a lot of us have had, if we don't have now, a choir that meets only once a week, or only an hour a week, a church choir, or at the most maybe an hour and a half. What do you do to in addition to trying to get the music learned for that service coming up? Well, what do you do if you really want to make that choir sound like something beautiful? And I've come up with a formula that I think really I've seen it work. And that, first of all, lay on the choir the responsibility of just singing correctly. The choir and the conductor have to always be musical. That's the second thing. And third, the conductor has to use the very best gesture, the most effective gestures, and the best choice of words possible. When I say sing correctly, I mean, we all have our own ideas about that, but I think if you can establish some fundamental things about singing with a choir that meets so infrequently, that it saves a lot of time. Some fundamental principles that you set up and you stick with them and insist on them. The same thing with that second point that I made, where the conductor and the choir just have to be consistently musical, whatever that means. But whether it be vocalizing or that very first sound or that very simple anthem or even something in unison, that it always be musical. And here was where a conductor's skills with technique is more important than with a professional choir, because those gestures have to really count, and the choice of words have to really count. The weaker the choir, I think it's more important that the conductor have first-rate conducting technique and a great choice of words. I made a list then of factors that are maybe constitute a little bit more elaborate approach to developing beautiful tone, and we've got a choir to demonstrate a few of these things, but it's difficult to show everything, but at least you'll have some chance to think about it and listen, even though we don't have an ideal situation. We haven't worked together but a few minutes, but I think it'll help just to gel some of these ideas that really are primarily musical, in other words, non-vocal. And there's a lot of crossover. I don't mean that everything stands alone, because a lot of things influence other factors. But I have a list of about 15 that I want to address. First, we start with the selection of voices. That's number one. And again, just to reiterate what I firmly believe, and that is to go for the musical over the vocal. And it's amazing, if you have people with great ears, sensitivity to really sensitive ears, that soon they hear and change their vocal production. If there's a vocal problem, but they have great ears, it's amazing what transpires just because they have such smart ears. Number two is something that's relative, but we forget about sometimes, and that's the element of space. And you can stand up where we're going to just show in a semi-dramatic way the element of space. It'll take us and if you have scores, the first example we're going to use is the old church. Measure 11 through 19. And we're going to sing in a tight formation, first of all, and then we're going to spread out. And once we're ready to sing for you, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and just listen. Here's the first example in what I call a tight formation of the old church. Now you can open your eyes. We're going to spread out and see if you can tell any difference. Okay, close your eyes. We're checking on you. Any difference? No? No difference. You can take 6 voices, 10 voices, and they can be in a corner in a choir loft, and it doesn't sound like much. You just give them a little space, and suddenly it's the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. It's amazing when just being aware of space. Not that spreading out that much will work. But the other thing, so often I've heard singers say, well, or conductors say, we need to be close to so we can hear each other. Well, you can hear a lot better if you spread out. If you're right on top of each other, you'll soon find that being spread apart a little bit gives you a lot better chance to hear each other. Now, I'm going to ask, this was a little section that opens up a full sound. We're going to take another example. If you look at the piece, setting of piece, the shaker tune, measure 1 through 11. We're just going to do the opening. This is to give you a demonstration of also soft dynamics, not just something that opens up, but how different space will make with something that's soft. Measures 1 through 11. We're just going to ask the sopranos to sing that line first time in tight formation. Now I'm going to ask the alto. That was just the sopranos, and it does say all female voices, I believe, on the score. But I just wanted to demonstrate also how this is a pretty low tessitura, but so often the lower voices, we forget, really enhance the upper voices in a lot of ways. So keep an eye and ear out for the altos reinforcing and enhancing soprano sound. likewise, the bass is enhancing what's above them. Now, here's the same section spread out, and you close your eyes and see if you see any difference. Hear any difference? The texture spread out, even a soft dynamic makes a quite different effect, I think. You can go back. Third thing on my list is unification of pronunciation, and it's one of the things that's so easy to overlook. And as a habit, at least I try to make it a habit, one of the last things, if I don't do it early on, going through the score before the first rehearsal and deciding what will the pronunciation be, because so often there are colloquial pronunciations, or just unifying the pronunciation makes quite a difference. And we're just going to demonstrate a couple cases, and not too dramatic either, but just to make you think about it. One of the famous words that I've run into over the years, famous because it seems to come up in so many pieces of music, the word roses. And when you sustain, when it's short, that's one thing, but when you sustain on the second syllable, it can be a problem. And we're just going to take a C major chord and let you listen to a mixture of final syllables, and then we're going to try to straighten it out and see if it makes a difference to that tone. Again, we're talking about tone, trying to come up with a beautiful unified tone. Here's the word roses with kind of here's a conductor who didn't tell his choir how to pronounce that second syllable. So, vowel or which syllable went out. I couldn't tell. Now we've decided we're going to try all three and see which one you would vote on. Let's start with roses. Tutti messa forte, roses. Roses. Modified, yeah, not quite so. Roses, just comfortable. And messa forte. Roses. Yeah, we're going to do in case you couldn't tell. Yeah. Roses. Roses. These are tough decisions, I think, that you need to make because it really makes a difference. Probably, I don't think you can find this in a dictionary, but we sort of probably speak it as a schwa sound, roses. But when you sustain it, you've got other problems. And I would tend, we have to make a decision. And right or wrong, if you don't, you're never going to get it unified. Anytime you settle on the vowel, EH, it's next to impossible to get that in tune. We'll just sing it again and see what you think about roses. Even though this is not probably the first solution, but you run onto the a lot with text, and this is the problem. Rose F. Roses. Roses. And then another example, if you look at Lay Me Low, measure 13. This is a subtle thing, but my choirs tend to voice when they see this word where instead of where. And we're going to do what is so common, unless you, at least with my choirs, unless you remind them, we're going to do the voiced where. And it makes an awful lot of difference what follows, because if we hear that the wind up, it can affect what follows dramatically. So we're going to sing it voiced first of all, measure 13 and 222. Do it correctly, blowing air. That's the only thing I can think of. Where? See if that affects the tone that follows, the sound that follows. Where slightly so we can hear it. This is one of the biggest things, but we'll move on. The unification of vowels. 4, sustaining ability. This is a tricky one. It's in a way, it's a difficult concept, but sustaining. I almost separate good choirs from not so good choirs by how well they sustain. I just think it's a difficult concept to articulate, at least, but you still have to talk about it. So that's what I recommend, and at least I try with my choirs. And then the biggest thing is to show it, of course. And we're going to do another example from Lay Me Low, just to, again, not that we can demonstrate it fully, but a chance to think about it as we listen. If you look at measure 13 through 15, we're going to avoid sustaining first, and then we're going to do it sustained. So measure 13 through 15. Unsustained.
Yep. That's 13. It's the same. 13.
Okay. Don't sustain. I think I made very clear beats. They were on the beat. But what happened? It just was note, note, note. So I give a little sermon to the choir, sustain, and then what do? I've got to show probably a lot of support with the left hand and as much horizontal as I can with the right hand to make that sustained quality. Let's see if it makes any difference. Plus, I paid them a lot to do this. Even the final chord you want to sustain, keep it sustained all the way. So invite with the left hand and do as much horizontal with the right as possible. cadence points, especially, and we just had one. The cadence points are especially crucial for sustaining. Number 5, special attention to dynamic extremes. I tend to hear a lot of choirs when they get a little bit beyond forte. Fortissimo, it's a subjective line, but the tone goes from being a nice, rich sound to being quite harsh. And the other extreme, piano, pianissimo, the tone tends to be very breathy. And we're going to take an example from Old Church. It's page 5, I think most scores, measure 30 through 40, and we're going to demonstrate opening up and probably going over the edge a little bit towards the harsh. I'm letting them sing as loud as they like. So measure 30 of Old Church. Now, I'm asking them, and we hardly know each other because it's been a very short time. I'm asking them to, when they try to reach what they think is a fortissimo, to don't go beyond what they think is a good tone, manufacturing a good tone. Now, you're relying on their honesty, on their sense of what good technique is. But let's see if it makes any difference, because if you don't catch a problem of over-singing in an audition, you're going to have to solve it. Or if you don't have auditions, you need to solve it. Because so often we get to a forte, fortissimo, or more, and here's where you want a nice, rich tone. So the choice of words is very important. If I say louder, that's going to mean one thing. If I say full tone, full sound, that conjures up something else. So both the gestures that you use and the words that you choose can affect that tone. At least I've done my part. We'll see what they do now. They're going to be careful when they get to the peak. Promise? Whether we reached it or not or did it, that's one thing. But let's not worry about that now. But that's what I always hear, or tend to hear so often when a choir opens up, is we go over the top, so to speak, with good vocal technique, and it becomes very harsh. And a choir needs a gorgeous, full tone so often. So it's a very important thing to watch when you're trying to establish a beautiful tone. The same thing with pianissimo. On the other extreme, we tend to be very breathy. If you'll take a look at Coventry Carol, measure 55 to the end. And we'll sing it without giving any attention to it being breathy right now. Okay, that didn't move me very much. I don't know what it moved you. What can we do? It's a pretty good tone, but it was certainly breathy to a certain extent and didn't have any vitality. So here again, I think the left hand can be terribly important with supporting and inviting a vital tone, and the right hand especially being much more horizontal whenever you can to help sustain. So sustaining carries over into these dynamic extremes, certainly, both the fortissimo, the forte, and the pianissimo. And we're going to do the same phrase, hoping that it won't be quite so breathy. Six, special attention to cadences. We're not gonna do the demonstration here. In a nutshell, a lot happens at cadences, and we tend to, even though we're probably aware that a lot of things happen at cadences, we tend to rush in and rush out. And there's so much that happens in cadences. I'm just saying the obvious, and especially final cadences. But the four things that come to mind that we almost need to, every time we face one, remind ourselves of is intonation. Sure, intonation is always critical, but at cadence points especially. Secondly, vibrato. If you don't have those chords, those notes in tune, or if we have all kinds of variances of pitches because of vibrato, there's no way that cadence can turn the way it's supposed to turn. Balances. When I say balances, I mean whatever the composer wanted. So quite often there's a tessitura problem. The tenors, quite often I hear, it seems like a lot of Bach chorales end with the tenor singing a third, and I hear the tenors soaring above the rest of the choir. And we don't want to hear just the third, but at cadence points, we've got to be very careful about balances, especially final cadences. And pacing. That when you have a piece like the one we just did with Steve Paula's, where the cadences kind of recur in a similar style, it's very easy to do them all the same. So it behooves us to probably vary them slightly. But pacing, at cadence points, these four things: intonation, vibrato, control, balancing, and pacing. Number 7 on my list is long notes. What is a long note? By definition, I call a long note anything that's longer than the note that preceded it. But we tend to, instead of sustaining, we tend to sit on long notes and add vibrato. And we're going to do an example, or give you a sample. If you look at Coventry Carol, measure 41 through 53. We're going to do it two ways. We're going to sit on them and add vibrato one way, and then we're going to do what I think is a better way. We're going to demonstrate another way of doing it with sustaining these long notes and see if we can get a much more sense of line rather than sitting on the notes. Would you also connect measure 51 to 52? Sustain long notes. What measure is it?
41.
3. Stretch the long. Now, from the conductor standpoint, it's much easier for me to sustain a 4 pattern than I do in that second measure, which is 3. So it's very easy to go horizontal to help the choir. But when I go to a 3, what do? I tend to do a sort of a scoop to get it to keep a line going. But otherwise, a straight 3 pattern is pretty difficult to be expressive on, I guess you could say. But still, if it doesn't work, then you need to tell the choir that that second measure needs to still be sustained. The choir's been doing extra duty. Would you give them a hand? We're going to let them go now. Thank you. Thank you, choir. Number 8 on my list, again, aspects that affect tone. And there is crossover. There's no doubt. I'm sure you're making mental notes to say, well, that's the same as something else. But it helps us to really focus on keywords. And the next one on my list is phrasing. Every single thing that goes into beautiful phrasing. How you start a phrase, where it goes, how it ends. But oftentimes we don't develop or have sensitivity to what about the next phrase? Are you going to pick it up where you left off, or are you going to start anew? And that's a huge thing. And just know that phrasing is the essence of all music, if you haven't already figured that out. 9, being musical. That's a very general statement. But I say be musical, every aspect, even silence. Just insist that your choir, from the time you vocalize to every note that you make, that you are musical. If you say, okay, we're going to vocalize and then we're going to make music, it's too late. You've got to instill every minute of your rehearsal, that everything you do, even if it's a mistake, if you're singing wrong notes, sing them musically. You just have got to get that in your system. Otherwise, you waste a lot of time saying things, repeating yourself over and over again. As I said, even silences. Don't anybody that knows my family take this out of this room, but my daughter, when she was quite young, my wife was sitting with her when she was practicing her piano for her next lesson, and she noticed she just skipped all the rests, just went right on. And my wife finally stopped her and said, "Didn't you notice those rests along the way?" "Oh, they're just a waste of time," she said. Silence can be just as musical as noise, so don't overlook the importance of silence, the rests. Number 10, vibrato control and vibrato unification, especially at cadence points. If you don't have those notes in tune, as I mentioned before, and just let everybody sing at their own vibrato rate, there's no way you're going to have a beautiful tone. 11, vitality. And of course, this crosses over to a lot of things we've talked about. But I notice especially that choirs lose vitality when they have quick notes. And the words I say is energize. And if you'll just look at the setting of peace, measure 23 through 36, I think it is. If you see those eighth notes, da da dee da 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 da, we tend to just sort of pounce through them. And let me just, I guess there's nobody here to give pitch. Can you pitch somebody? Quickly? And we can all just sing it. Do you have a spot? 22. Pick up to 24. Pick up to 24. Just yeah. Everybody just sing it on ta right now. Don't even have to know the text. I'll give you 2 beats plus 1. 1, 2, and 1 on ta. Okay with this. Good. Let's do it again now, and impose a little crescendo. Ta 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 ta. Energize all the eighth notes, and it'll suddenly bring those repeated notes to life. And then especially at measure 28, ta 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 ta. Maybe put tenuto notes under them or over them to remind you that you don't rush them. But let's just sing the same phrase now with on ta, and put as much vitality in those eighth notes as you can, and impose when they repeat, impose a little crescendo. Again, 3 beats. 1, 2, and ta. Yeah, okay, good. Let me just give us pitch for pick up to measure 28. Just do pick up to 28, no piano, just, on ta, and it really energizes the 16th notes. 1, 2, and. Yeah, good. That's good. That's exactly right. But usually go ta 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 ta, and they rush them. People rush them, but it's amazing what can be added to the tone quality if you energize those fast-moving notes. Thank you. Number 12, balance. When I say balance or balances, and again, it's one of the most important elements, I think, for beautiful tone. I mean correct balances. And you'll see just a couple of obvious examples. If you look at Old Church, and if you look at measure 11 through 19, you see in the tenor and where Paulus has put for measure 12 and 13 is the bass is divided, and then in 14 the tenor is divided. Well, you want to know, does the composer really want this to happen, where the tenors dominate the first 2 measures in this balance, and then suddenly the basses dominate this balance in 14? No. You would second guess, without calling Steve Paulus, you would guess that probably he wanted this equal balance. So at 12, midway, I would want it TBB, 3 ways balanced. And same thing through 14. It's just that those people in the middle voice are going to have to jump up to another line. So when I say balances, they've got to be whatever the composer really wanted. And you can tell right away it'll affect the sound. And there are many more examples that we could find. 13, accuracy of pitch. Obvious. Pitch, intonation. Absolutely fundamental to beautiful tone. There's no possibility in my book for beautiful tone without accurate intonation. 14, conductor's gestures. The challenge is to pack as much information into this right hand as possible, and to me, the left hand should not be just duplicating all the time, but enhancing what the right hand does. And those of you that are younger and still moldable, don't underestimate getting a first-rate conducting technique under your belt. There are many choirs that sound wonderful with not so good conducting because they're good musicians that are leading the way. But I always walk away and say that choir would have been even better if that conductor had a really effective conducting technique. 15, the conductor's choice of words. We alluded to that, of course, earlier. But what we say and how we say it is so important. Again, if I say loud, that's going to mean one thing, and I do this gesture. If I say full sound, that can make quite a difference. The choice of words and how you say it, or metaphors. I'm not very good at metaphors, but a lot of you are, and they can be just magic many times. In any case, it's just really interesting to see how many aspects go into making beautiful tone. But there's a sort of a mysterious element that you can't put your finger on. And we could all do these things that I've just talked about, but each one of you got up in front of the choir would probably sound differently. There's this mysterious part that it's unexplainable, and we just simply have to let go. But I think you realize that my big point is that the fundamental secret, at least to me, is that, and I think conductors really miss the boat when they overlook the fact of musical factors can have as much to do with beautiful tone as simply vocal factors. End of sermon. Any questions that you want to ask? Yes?
When you were talking about balance, like in the Paulus, would you try to achieve that three-part balance by asking certain parts to sing louder?
No.
Or like the number of singers?
Yeah, number of singers. When we start any choral year with my choirs, we assign, of course, first and second. So that in the men's section, there'd be first and second tenor, first and second bass or baritone. But same right away. Everybody knows TBB balance. So some of the baritones might be singing second tenors. Some of the second tenors might be in the middle part. Same thing with the women. And then you go beyond that. Sometimes you have to go to 5 parts or 6 parts, depending on the score. No. It could be that you eventually have to also adjust numbers, but in general, no. Do it on paper. But that's a good question, and I think it just should be standard operating procedure to everyone knows what they do with 2-part in their section, and when the men or the women go 3-part, they know exactly what to sing. Those poor people in the middle have arrows all over their scores, and they learn to be frustrated. Yes, good question.
Yes, my question has to do with your spacing of singers and what you think really happened when they opened up. Do you think that it was a totally acoustical phenomena, or was it that the singer has to adjust?
Good point. Could you hear him? But you hit both of them. I wish I'd have mentioned that because that's right on. People listen differently when they spread out like this. So it's both acoustic thing, and it's a smarts thing, a sensitivity thing. Absolutely. And people, once they get used to, if your choirs haven't already done it, get used to singing with some space, they can't stand it when they're then crunched in choirs where they have to be right on top of each other. And singing in the backs of voices doesn't make very good sound. The backs of singers in front of you don't help the sound very much. But no, both. You really hit a very important thing. Thank you. Good. Well, thanks for the listening, and we'll see you around campus.